From terrorizing some kids enjoying Halloween to quite literally abducting SpongeBob and friends, let's delve into all the times the Flying Dutchman caused chaos. We're starting our list with Scaredy Pants, an episode where the Flying Dutchman gets his revenge on SpongeBob for daring to impersonate him. So it's Halloween, and SpongeBob is cleaning up at the Krusty Krab, minding his own business, when suddenly the lights flicker, the door slams, and creepy boo messages pop up on the order slips. SpongeBob freaks out, no real surprise there, and bolts for the door, but Mr. Krabs stops him to share his annual scary story about the Flying Dutchman, which just seems cruel, honestly. But the Dutchman is supposedly a ghost who steals souls on Halloween. Squidward, sensing an opportunity to traumatize SpongeBob, jumps in dressed as the Dutchman, scaring him senseless and earning him a new nickname.
Scaredy Pants gets easier to scare every year!
Humiliated and still trembling, SpongeBob runs home, jumping at shadows and getting scared by literally everything. Patrick pops up with Groucho Marx glasses, giving SpongeBob another mini heart attack. It actually suits Patrick, though, weirdly. Once SpongeBob calms down, the two hatch a plan to reclaim his dignity. They'll dress him up as the Flying Dutchman and scare everyone else. Their first attempt flops because SpongeBob's square head just isn't ghostly enough, which I don't buy. I'd be terrified of that face. But Patrick tries to help by shaving it into a round shape. Problem solved? Not at all. Feeling unstoppable, the duo parades around town trying to scare people, but instead of screams, they just get blank, confused stares. However, SpongeBob and Patrick think they're crushing it. Their grand finale is crashing a big Halloween party on the Krusty Krab roof. With Patrick lowering SpongeBob from a rope and doing his best ghost voice, they finally get some screams, until Patrick gets stung by a jellyfish. He freaks out, lets go of the rope, and SpongeBob goes flying, revealing his true identity. And of course, everybody laughs at him. Just when SpongeBob's humiliation seems complete, the real Flying Dutchman shows up, furious at being impersonated by an amateur.
Out of all the Dutchman costumes I've seen, yours is the most insulting.
He's ready to snatch everyone's souls, but when he rips off SpongeBob's costume, he's greeted by a horrifying sight. SpongeBob's exposed brain thanks to Patrick's earlier shaving. The Dutchman is so terrified that he flees screaming. And finally, SpongeBob actually scares people. He looks like a monster. Everyone else bolts, leaving SpongeBob triumphant. Patrick calls SpongeBob's exposed brain a pink hat, but when SpongeBob points out that it's his brain, Patrick just screams and runs too. So, the Dutchman crime spree? Assault! Stealing everyone else's souls? Well, that's assault right there. The Flying Dutchman would struggle to explain that one in court, unless he just stole the jury's souls, but that's probably not a good move. Sentencing highlights: the Dutchman could face assault charges of up to 10 years with up to $10,000 in fines. Fair to say that he's not a big fan of people making fun of him. But he's even angrier when it comes to people trespassing on his property, like in our next episode, Shanghaied. So this one starts with SpongeBob starting his day digging through a box of Kelpo for a toy prize, but instead of finding a toy, a giant anchor crashes into his house. Naturally, SpongeBob assumes it's a baby that fell from the sky. Totally logical, right? He drags Squidward outside, but Squidward is already annoyed and tries to explain that no, it's not a baby, it's quite literally just a huge anchor. Then Patrick shows up, agrees it's a sky baby, and Squidward absolutely loses his tiny mind. Before they can argue further, the anchor moves and smashes into Squidward's house.
Let's go! Now I can finally give this anchor dropper a piece of my mind!
I don't know, Squidward. That ship has a spooky green glow around it.
That's probably because its good-for-nothing owner is too lazy to clean or drop his anchors in the right place.
SpongeBob and Patrick tag along, obviously, just in case Squidward needs backup. But when they reach the top, they discover that it's the Flying Dutchman's ship. The big ghost himself shows up, terrifying Squidward.
It's Squidward. He wants to complain to you.
No, I don't.
But what about all that stuff about him having a dirty ship and being lazy and all?
Big mistake. The Dutchman roasts Squidward, literally, and then turns his spooky wrath on SpongeBob and Patrick. When they try to escape by jumping off the ship, they keep landing right back on deck. The Dutchman tells them they're doomed to be his ghostly crew forever, whether they want to or not. Squidward protests, and the Dutchman, fed up, tosses him into some horrific void called the Fly of Despair. It's worse than you could possibly imagine. Yeah, SpongeBob and Patrick are totally freaked out now.
Would anyone else like to enter the Fly of Despair?
No, well, we know our place now, Mr. Dutchman.
To help, they join the Dutchman in scaring Bikini Bottom, but their version of terror is more goofy than ghoulish, which annoys the Dutchman to no end. So he comes up with a new plan. He's just going to eat them instead. Locked in a room, SpongeBob and Patrick's only escape is through the dreaded perfume department. Yeah, that's not any better. They survive somehow, grab the Dutchman's dining sock, his ghostly Achilles heel, and use it as leverage. The Dutchman catches them, but can't attack without ruining his sock. Negotiation time. He offers 3 wishes for its return. Patrick wastes one, wishing he'd known about the wishes earlier, and SpongeBob uses another to bring Squidward back, even though he'd just escaped the Fly of Despair.
He won't be able to eat us because I wish that the Dutchman was a vegetarian.
Which, you have to admit, is pretty genius. So there we go, they're safe. Or so they think until they realize they've been turned into fruit in the Dutchman's blender. He's now a hippie chasing them in a ghostly van, so yeah, that's an ending. The Dutchman's done it again. We have quite a few crimes in this one. Property damage. The Dutchman's anchor damaging Squidward's house is a clear sign of damage, intentional or not, and it'll cost a hell of a lot to fix it. False imprisonment. The Flying Dutchman forcing SpongeBob and Patrick to be his ghostly crew forever pretty clearly suggests that they won't be allowed to leave, which, well, that's never good. Terroristic threats. The Flying Dutchman's threat to eat SpongeBob and Patrick could be interpreted as terroristic threats because, do I need to explain? Possible sentences. Property damage, $500 to $10,000 in fines and 3 years in prison. False imprisonment, 3 years in jail. Terroristic threats, up to 20 years in prison. Okay, so he's a little psychotic now and then. But he's also someone who has a decent moral compass. Well, kinda. In Born Again Crabs, he punishes crabs for his endless greed. It's closing time at the Krusty Krab, and SpongeBob finds this nasty, moldy Krabby Patty hiding under the grill. Naturally, he wants to toss it out, but Mr. Krabs has other ideas. He's determined to sell it for a measly 5.2 cents, because why waste money throwing it out when you could just, poison the customers for profit? He even orders SpongeBob not to make any fresh patties until this rotting one is sold. The next day, chaos begins. Squidward reluctantly tries to serve the rancid patty to a customer, but just one whiff sends the poor guy screaming and flipping out the door. Soon the Krusty Krab is a ghost town all over one burger. Squidward blames the moldy patty for the downturn, but Mr. Krabs won't hear it. SpongeBob, meanwhile, reveals he's had to cage the patty because it's alive and growling like a wild animal. It's disgusting. Still, Mr. Krabs insists it's edible and takes a bite to prove his point. Predictably, he turns green and ends up in the hospital. And that's where the Flying Dutchman comes in, ready to drag Mr. Krabs to Davy Jones' locker for his greedy ways. Mr. Krabs tries to fake his way out of it, even claiming his name is Harold Flower, but the Dutchman isn't buying it. In the locker, Mr. Krabs begs for a second chance, promising to be generous from now on. Surprisingly, the Dutchman lets him go. Maybe he can change. Doubt it. Back at the Krusty Krab, things take a weird turn. Mr. Krabs reopens with a whole new vibe. Free refills, employee perks, the works. But then a $10,000 bill arrives and SpongeBob and Squidward realize something's off. Mr. Krabs thinks it's all a nightmare, that he's still in his coma. But when reality hits and he realizes this stuff is costing him, he snaps back to his cheapskate ways, revoking everything.
No more refills! Give me back them toys, you freeloaders! Show's over, cheapskate!
The Flying Dutchman returns, furious, and offers him a choice. Keep SpongeBob or take the 62 cents in his pocket. Guess what Mr. Krabs picks? Yep, the money, of course. SpongeBob's heartbroken, Squidward's furious, and Mr. Krabs quickly realizes that without SpongeBob, he's doomed to fail. Luckily, the Dutchman brings SpongeBob back, not because of Mr. Krabs groveling, but because SpongeBob's endless chatter was driving him nuts. In the end, Mr. Krabs apologizes, SpongeBob brushes it off, and everyone laughs it off. Meanwhile, the Dutchman's stuck taking calls from SpongeBob, who just won't give up on him. Now that's friendship. And it's also a lot of criminal activity. Food safety violations. Mr. Krabs' efforts to sell an expired patty is a clear health code violation. One of many, I would imagine. Fraud. By attempting to sell the moldy patty as fresh food, Mr. Krabs is engaging in fraudulent behavior. Again, pretty much just a Tuesday for him. Unfair labor practices. Mr. Krabs' treatment of his employees, particularly SpongeBob, could be considered exploitative and potentially violate labor laws. Man, he's just a criminal every day, huh? Possible sentences? Food safety violations, 3 years in prison and fines of up to $5,000. Fraud, 3 years in prison combined with the above. Unfair labor practices, $500 fines, and all back pay for the employees in question. Of course, it's very rare that the Dutchman has any interest in helping people. He tends to spend more time just taking advantage, as he does when he moves in with SpongeBob in Ghost Host. So this one starts with the Flying Dutchman's ship breaking down because of some heavy fog. Since his ship needs repairs, the Dutchman crashes at SpongeBob's place. And by crashes, I mean he's scaring SpongeBob nonstop.
I'm stuck here while my ship is being repaired. Till then, I'm here to haunt ya!
It's not your typical haunted house vibe, more like a relentless prankster ghost who loves traumatizing SpongeBob every second. Of course, SpongeBob's had enough and turns to Squidward for help, but Squidward's not buying the whole ghost thing and slams the door on him. SpongeBob tries Patrick next, but he's just too scared to get involved. He has no friends. And even worse, for a moment, it seems like the Flying Dutchman ate Gary, which would be one hell of a crime. But it's all a misunderstanding and Gary's totally fine. Still, SpongeBob's left rattled as the Dutchman doubles down on his scare games, which go on for a while, until he finally crosses a massive line. Eventually, everyone in Bikini Bottom stops being scared of the Flying Dutchman, like they're over it. And this is a big problem for him since scaring people is literally his whole thing. He's spiraling, worried he's lost his touch, so SpongeBob steps in to help him reclaim his ghostly glory. They try a bunch of scare tactics, but they all backfire. One person screams not because of the Dutchman, but because they saw a mattress salesman. Another time, a jump rope takes him out. I mean, the whole thing is just a train wreck from the beginning. 6 months later, the Dutchman's still crashing at SpongeBob's house, doing nothing but making a mess. SpongeBob finally snaps and gets him to watch a motivational video to try and get him back on track. But that doesn't work either. SpongeBob suggests scaring Squidward, who's always said ghosts aren't real. And bingo, it actually works. The Dutchman scares Squidward so badly that he runs screaming through the walls of his house. Finally, the Dutchman's back in the game, baby! At the end, the Dutchman casually admits his ship's been fixed for months, meaning all of this was totally useless. But he gives SpongeBob a parting gift, which turns out to be one last scare. But instead of freaking out, SpongeBob just laughs.
Ah, good old Dutchie!
Yeah, let's see how good he is when we see his crimes. Trespassing and illegal occupancy. The Flying Dutchman's extended stay at SpongeBob's house without permission is totally illegal, and also annoying. Harassment and emotional distress. The Flying Dutchman's relentless pranks and scare tactics on SpongeBob are basically just causing him deep emotional trauma. Public nuisance. The Dutchman's attempts to scare the entire population of Bikini Bottom are a public nuisance and totally disrupt the peace. Possible sentences: trespassing and illegal occupancy, a year in jail. Harassment and emotional distress, $4,000. Public nuisance, $2,500. You can't get much more chaotic than terrorizing an entire city. Yet, our next episode sees the Dutchman using his gifts for good. Money Talks features him bringing Mr. Krabs' biggest dream to life, at a cost. The episode starts with a guy offering $5 to sit at a table that's already taken by 2 elderly customers. Any normal person would just say no, but Mr. Krabs kicks them out faster than their dentures could say why. After all, and this gets him thinking, what if it really did? Yeah, we're going truly crazy in this episode. So later, Mr. Krabs is at home obsessing over making money talk. He's shaking bills and coins, hoping for some magical breakthrough like a madman. Then bam, the Flying Dutchman shows up.
I'll grant your wish, but it'll cost you.
Yeah, my immortal soul. I've heard that speech before.
Well, great.
Well, fair deal, I guess. I mean, what's a soul compared to money? The Dutchman sprinkles some ghostly pixie dust, and Mr. Krabs wakes up thinking it was just a dream until his money actually starts talking. Like, for real.
Hey, it's a nickel! What were you doing in my belly button, little fella?
I got stuck in there during your last coin shower. I don't want to talk about it.
At first, it's his dream paradise. Krabs is thrilled, hauling all his cash home from the Krusty Krab to chat with it, but things go downhill fast. Turns out, money doesn't want to sit around, it wants to be spent. They're begging him to buy the most random stuff. Fairy princess costumes, corn dogs, diapers, you name it. If he doesn't need it, the money wants to buy it. But it's not just annoying, it's expensive. Mr. Krabs is spiraling over his money disappearing before his eyes. He even tries to bury the money to shut it up, but SpongeBob catches him mid-freakout and assumes everything's fine. Because hey, Krabs losing his mind over money is a common thing, right? By now, Krabs is a mess, totally regretting the whole sell your soul deal. He calls for the Flying Dutchman and tries to back out, but nope. No takebacks with ghost contracts. They are ironclad. The Dutchman shows up ready to claim his prize, except when he tries to take Mr. Krabs' soul, all he gets is an IOU. And we know how meaningless those are from Krabs. Here's the kicker. It turns out Krabs already sold his soul to a bunch of other ghosts. A parade of spooky figures, including a ghostly SpongeBob because Krabs didn't pay him one time. They all show up to stake their claim.
We were here first, Pops.
We've all got claim on Krabs' soul.
Get to the back of the line. Now, I'm sure we can sort this out.
It's chaos, and Mr. Krabs is left in the ultimate mess. All of his own making, of course. Let's not feel too bad for him. The episode ends with all the ghosts lined up, leaving Krabs to deal with his ridiculous ghost debt. And the debt will be even stronger when we see the fines he has to pay. Discrimination and unfair treatment. Mr. Krabs kicked out elderly customers who have already taken a table in favor of a customer willing to pay $5. This is blatant discrimination against the elderly, and bad for business. Labor law violations. Mr. Krabs didn't pay SpongeBob at least once, resulting in SpongeBob's ghost having a claim on Krabs' soul. This is a clear violation of labor laws and could be considered wage theft. And again, just a jerk move. Possible sentences: discrimination, $1,000, labor law violations, $5,000, and a full investigation. Okay, so now we know that the Dutchman can do basically anything. And that's on full display in our next episode, The Curse of Bikini Bottom, where the Dutchman forces SpongeBob and Patrick to become ghosts. So the episode begins with SpongeBob and Patrick being their usual chaotic selves. They're bored, so they break into Squidward's shed and ask to borrow his lawnmower. Well, at least they asked after breaking in. Squidward is secretly hoping they'll wipe themselves out with it. Naturally, they do, and they end up losing control and mowing their way straight into the cemetery. Very respectful. Underground, the Flying Dutchman is having his own problems, trying to pick the perfect shirt for a date. He finally settles on one, but then SpongeBob and Patrick ruin everything by driving over his grave repeatedly, shaking dirt everywhere and messing up his perfect outfit. Things get worse when the lawnmower accidentally shaves off his beard. Now he'll look like a grimy homeless ghost. Furious, the Dutchman stops their rampage and yells at them for wrecking his whole cool ghost vibe. Feeling bad, SpongeBob and Patrick admit they don't really know what it's like to be a ghost. Big mistake, guys. The Dutchman curses them, turning them into ghosts until his beard grows back. As ghosts, SpongeBob and Patrick have a rough time adjusting to the afterlife. They try to scare Squidward but get doused with his garden hose instead, which is weird because I thought ghosts had no physical body. Anyway, when SpongeBob tries to go about his life, ghost problems pop up everywhere, literally. His house keys fall through his hands, he falls through his bed, and eventually he just ends up underground. Patrick's no better. He complains that he can see through his own eyelids, which is as creepy as it sounds. At the Krusty Krab, things hit rock bottom. SpongeBob can't hold a spatula or flip patties without everything slipping through his grasp. Patrick, meanwhile, freaks everyone out when his food just passes through his ghostly body. The customers mistake them for mermaids and flee in terror. But SpongeBob and Patrick have had enough and head back to the cemetery to beg the Dutchman to turn them back into their usual annoying physical selves. The Dutchman tries, but fails to reverse it, explaining the curse won't lift until his beard grows back fully. Movember is not a happy time at Bikini Bottom, it turns out. SpongeBob and Patrick decide to give him a makeover to speed it all up, with SpongeBob even becoming his beard. Literally. Eventually, they all return to normal, but the Dutchman reappears later, screaming because his date, a giant, horrifying monster, is ready to marry him.
I ain't the marrying type.
He bolts, leaving SpongeBob and Patrick bewildered as always. Turns out he's just not ready for a long-term relationship. But is he ready to face justice for these many crimes? Trespassing. By entering the cemetery without permission, SpongeBob and Patrick are trespassing on private property, not to mention being disrespectful to the dead. Vandalism. The act of mowing through the cemetery and damaging graves could be classified as vandalism. I mean, it's not exactly done with good intentions. Disturbing the peace. SpongeBob and Patrick's chaotic behavior in the cemetery and their attempts to scare Squidward could be considered disturbing the peace. Potential sentencing: trespassing, $500 and community service. Vandalism, $1,000 to $2,000 depending on the extent of the damage. Disturbing the peace, $500 to $2,500. Well, I guess it's kinda sweet that the Dutchman has a whole love life going on for himself. But he's also out looking for his money to prevent it being stolen by sketchy people, like Mr. Krabs in the episode Ghoul Fools. The episode opens with SpongeBob and Patrick chilling in jellyfish fields, cloud watching, when this creepy, haunted houseboat flies by before crash landing nearby. Naturally, Patrick thinks it's an amusement park attraction, but SpongeBob's genuinely spooked. Something about it is truly freaky. They decide to check it out, and while Patrick's unimpressed, SpongeBob is totally creeped out, especially when a painting of flowers turns into snakes that slither into his pores, which Patrick barely notices, but I definitely did. And man, I wish I didn't. Things escalate when a giant hairy hand snatches SpongeBob, giving him a full-on nightmare before plopping him back beside Patrick, who, again, completely oblivious. Seriously, is this guy ever paying attention to anything? They soon meet Lord Poltergeist, a ghost playing the pipe organ. Patrick thinks it's just another animatronic in a pizza joint and even asks the ghost to sing like some kind of performing puppet. Lord Poltergeist obliges with a sea shanty, and while SpongeBob's convinced he's real, Patrick still wants pizza. But then he gets it, and he wishes he didn't. It's anchovy pizza, which finally freaks them both out.
You are real ghost! You are real ghost!
Turns out Lord Poltergeist's boat broke down and he needs a new head gasket to get it airborne again. To make sure SpongeBob and Patrick take the task seriously, he bottles up their souls as collateral. He gives them a gold doubloon to buy the part and warns them they have 24 hours, or their souls are his forever. Panicked, they run to the Krusty Krab, causing mass chaos among the customers. Mr. Krabs sees the doubloon and decides to help, mostly so he can steal the ghost's treasure. Helping others isn't really his thing. A chaotic crew of SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, Mr. Krabs, and Sandy, armed with ghost-catching gear obviously, head back to the boat. But things quickly go south, and fast. Mr. Krabs tries to swipe the doubloons, setting off a trap that summons Lord Poltergeist. SpongeBob hands over the head gasket, and the ghost returns their souls, only to reveal it was just orange soda in the bottle the whole time. He never took their souls, just tricked them to finish the job on time. Man, these ghosts keep doing this. You just can't trust them at all. Then Lord Poltergeist punishes Krabs, Patrick, and Squidward with their worst fears. Krabs facing a toll toilet, Patrick annoying a sentient donut, and Squidward meeting a giant SpongeBob. Sandy saves them, but the Flying Dutchman arrives to reclaim his gold. A massive void sucks everyone in, leaving the Krusty Krab floating in limbo. Probably the best place for it, all things considered. The episode ends with a demonic SpongeBob flipping the restaurant upside down, laughing in the Dutchman's voice. And I will not be sleeping for some time. Neither will these guys. In prison. Trespassing. SpongeBob and Patrick enter Lord Poltergeist's haunted houseboat without permission, which constitutes trespassing. Theft and attempted theft. Mr. Krabs' attempt to steal Lord Poltergeist's treasure is a clear case of attempted theft, and very much in character for him. Public disturbance. SpongeBob and Patrick causing chaos among customers at the Krusty Krab could be classified as disturbing the peace. Possible sentencing: trespassing, $500 and community service. Theft and attempted theft, $2,500 considering the value of the item he wanted to steal. Public disturbance, $1,000 since it's a private business. Well, we can't deny that the Dutchman is genuinely good at being scary. But is he good enough to teach others? He sure tries in our next episode, The Ghost of Plankton. The episode kicks off with Plankton watching a horror movie pretending to be a ghost and getting the bright idea that becoming a ghost might just help him steal the Krabby Patty formula, which actually is a pretty horrible, unthinkably bad idea. Even Karen is unimpressed, but he whips up a ghost extracting machine and transforms into a ghost anyway. His plan seems genius. He can float through walls, but oops, ghosts can't actually grab stuff. Big flaw that any of us could have seen coming. Enter the Flying Dutchman, cackling from Mr. Krabs' chair like the spooky menace he is. He takes Plankton under his ectoplasmic wing, promising to train him in the fine art of ghosting. An honorable profession, of course, if you're a devious little schemer. Lesson 1, shape-shifting. The Dutchman morphs into all kinds of terrifying forms, but Plankton can only manage a blob before settling on a copycat look of the Dutchman himself. The Dutchman rolls with it, smacks him with a mallet, and they're off to lesson 2. So a little casual assault and on to the next lesson. Next up, scaring people. The Dutchman shows Plankton how it's done, terrifying a thief into oblivion. Plankton tries, but instead of scaring anyone, he freaks himself out by accidentally catching his reflection in a mirror. Well, nothing is scarier than ugliness, I guess. The Dutchman whacks him with a golf club for good measure, and they head to lesson 3, haunting. Finally. The haunting takes them to Squidward's house. Plankton, now feeling the ghostly vibe, turns into Squidward's bed and starts shaking it. Squidward panics, hides in his dresser, and starts playing his clarinet terribly. Plankton gets so annoyed that he yanks the clarinet and morphs into a ghostly SpongeBob. Squidward faints and Plankton realizes, hey, he can pick things up now. They're finally ready for the ultimate heist. With the Dutchman's tips, Plankton snags the formula, but there's a catch. The formula is not a ghost, so it can't actually leave the safe. So this whole thing has been completely pointless. Frustrated, Plankton gives up and returns to his body, only to find Karen has thrown him a funeral. Turns out if you leave your body too long, everyone assumes you're dead. Funny how that works, huh? The Dutchman seizes the chance to possess Plankton's body, but the mob isn't having it.
Those people are angry. Woo! I never thought I'd say this, but I'd rather be a dead me than an alive you. Bye!
Just as Plankton gets his body back, the mob stomps on him, leaving Plankton battered but happy to be alive. In classic spooky fashion, the Dutchman ends with one final jump scare, just to really stick it to the audience. But who gets taken down to prison? Attempted theft. Plankton's primary goal throughout the episode is to steal the Krabby Patty formula, as always. Breaking and entering. Plankton, as a ghost, enters the Krusty Krab, and it's safe without permission, which constitutes breaking and entering. Harassment and invasion of privacy. The Flying Dutchman and Plankton's haunting of Squidward in his own home is an obvious harassment case and an invasion of privacy. Possible sentencing? Attempted theft. Anywhere between $500 and $2,500, depending on what he gets. Breaking and entering, $1,000 and 3 months in prison, depending on damage. Harassment and invasion of privacy, $1,000. The Dutchman is a master of fear, but he's, not good with other people. Just wait until you see what he's like with Mr. Krabs on a desert island in this next episode, SpongeBob SquarePants vs. The Big One. It all starts on a scorching day in Bikini Bottom. The Krusty Krab is empty and the heat's unbearable, so Mr. Krabs decides to relocate the entire business to Goo Lagoon. Things spiral quickly when Patrick tips over the grill, somehow flipping everyone into different places. SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick end up on a surfer island, Sandy gets stranded on a tiny deserted island, and Mr. Krabs finds himself smack dab in the middle of the Dutchman's triangle. Honestly, keeping them all separated is probably a good move. But then the Flying Dutchman crashes into Mr. Krabs while carrying groceries. His reaction? Steal Mr. Krabs' cash register to make up for all these spilled groceries. There's just one problem. Krabs loves his money, and he refuses to let go of his precious cashy. Back on the island, SpongeBob panics because the only way off is surfing and he's clueless. The locals point him, Patrick, and Squidward to Jack Kahuna Laguna, also known as JKL, the ultimate surfing guru. JKL takes his sweet time teaching them. Seriously, he surfs for 2 hours straight. And eventually he introduces them to the Big One, a legendary wave that only appears every 1,000 years. The catch? Riding it home will require a sacrifice. Someone won't make it. Again, probably a good move. Meanwhile, the Flying Dutchman's mischief isn't over. While grappling with Mr. Krabs over Cashy, the cash register tray springs out, sending the Dutchman straight to Davy Jones' locker. There, we meet the Davy Jones, who tortures the Dutchman with socks. Yep, why overthink torture? Back to the Big One. As SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick ride the wave, chaos strikes again. Boards get destroyed, and JKL sacrifices himself to save them, getting absorbed by the wave in a big dramatic moment. Somehow, everyone makes it back to Goo Lagoon, where Sandy crash lands her helicopter after building an entire luxury resort on her island. JKL, of course, shows up alive and well. It's a cartoon, after all, and kids don't like characters ending at all. Returning Cashy to Mr. Krabs. The episode ends with everyone partying at a beach luau, dancing like none of this absolute madness ever happened. And so will I. But what I won't forget are the crimes. Theft and property damage. The Flying Dutchman steals Mr. Krabs' cash register, Cashy, as compensation for his spilled groceries. This is a clear case of theft and could also be considered extortion, but we don't want to add more to this, right? Reckless endangerment. Mr. Krabs moving his business to Goo Lagoon without proper safety measures could be seen as reckless endangerment, especially when Patrick tips over the grill, causing harm to others. Unlicensed business operation. Operating the Krusty Krab on a public beach without proper permits or licenses is likely illegal, but then when has Krabs ever cared? Abandonment. Mr. Krabs essentially abandons his employees, SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick, when they end up stranded on the Surfer Island, which could be considered a form of negligence. Potential sentencing? Theft and property damage, whatever the value of the register is, and also an additional $1,000 fine for the property damage. Reckless endangerment, $3,000. Unlicensed business operation, $3,500 and additional taxes. Abandonment, $500 and a serious discussion about replacing him. Apparently, the pull of money is just too much for the Dutchman to resist. But it is nothing compared to how enraged he gets in The Legend of Boo Keeny Bottom, and all because people are not taking him seriously. The episode kicks off with SpongeBob decorating his house for Halloween, all sparkly and cute, which Patrick promptly trashes for not being scary enough. Patrick has a whole theory when it comes to Halloween.
You just have to remember one simple trick, and that is scary equals funny.
SpongeBob rolls with it, and they head out trick-or-treating, just to have a really good time. Things start lighthearted. Sandy's got her mad scientist vibe going with jars of weirdness I don't really want to think about. And the Krusty Krab and Chum Bucket have their own haunted tours going on. SpongeBob finds it all hilarious, which ticks everyone off because he's missing the whole point of Halloween. But SpongeBob's laughter doesn't just annoy his friend, it catches the attention of the Flying Dutchman up in the sky. This ghost isn't here for giggles, so he swoops down to investigate.
Who dares to laugh at All Hallows Eve?
SpongeBob explains Patrick's scary equals funny theory, and the Dutchman is not impressed with any of it. To prove how wrong SpongeBob is, he invites the duo aboard his haunted pirate ship for a thrill ride to remember. It's packed with creepy ghosts, ghouls, and all the classic Halloween scares. But SpongeBob keeps laughing, which only annoys the Dutchman more. This little brat just cannot be scared. Then the Dutchman cranks it up a notch. He unleashes a ghostly mist that snatches the souls of Sandy, Squidward, Mr. Krabs, Plankton, and even Gary, locking them in cages. SpongeBob laughs it off at first, thinking it's all part of the joke, until Patrick's soul gets caged too. That's when it clicks. Sometimes scary is just plain scary. I could have told you that, bro. SpongeBob finally realizes the damage their goofy theory has done and decides to rescue his friends. The Dutchman, meanwhile, is busy torturing the souls and ignoring Plankton's bizarre offer to split world domination. How would you even do that? Just as things get dire, SpongeBob shows up in Sandy's acorn monster suit for a dramatic rescue attempt. but the Dutchman isn't impressed until SpongeBob tricks him into exploring his brain. Inside, it's a bizarre, colorful nightmare that freaks the Dutchman out, especially when a giant naked baby SpongeBob shows up for a hug.
I love you this much!
Okay, probably the most horrifying thing I have ever seen on this show. Terrified, the Dutchman flees and everyone's souls return to their bodies. Lesson learned: shortcuts like scary equals funny don't work, and SpongeBob and Patrick promise to face their fears the right way next time. They head to a Krusty Krab party to celebrate the holiday. In a scary way. Just think about that SpongeBob baby. Or think about these crimes! Kidnapping and false imprisonment. The Flying Dutchman captures the souls of Sandy, Squidward, Mr. Krabs, Plankton, Gary, and Patrick, locking them in cages. This action could be interpreted as kidnapping and false imprisonment at best. Torture. The Flying Dutchman is described as torturing the souls of the captured characters, which is a serious crime and human rights violation. Possible sentencing: kidnapping and false imprisonment, 10 years in prison. Torture: life in prison.